Hello everyone, and welcome back to Classical Conscience. I am so happy for you to meet my special guest today, Anthony Parnther. Anthony is a friend and colleague who I know primarily through recording sessions we've done together for TV and film. If you've watched any number of movies or TV shows, chances are you've heard Anthony play bassoon. However, Anthony's tremendous artistry also makes him a fabulous conductor. He's the music director of the San Bernardino Symphony and the Southeast Symphony, both here in California, and is often sought after by other orchestras as a guest conductor. Are you ready to meet him? Okay, let's go. Well, here we are with Anthony Parnther. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk to you about some music.
I am as well. Let's get to it.
So why don't we start out with how did music become a part of your life? Classical music especially. Was this something that you had when you were young, or was it like a late sort of thing? I can't imagine it was the late sort of thing, but tell us about that.
Actually, for me, it did come kind of late.
Okay.
I grew up in a household that was very conservative. My parents were not big into letting me go over to my friend's house or going to theme parks or having fun of any sort. Bless them, bless my parents. But a lot of my friends were in this thing called band. And I'd be sitting in math class or social studies class, and over the intercom, I would hear what all of the members of the Lincoln Middle School band report to the bus for their trip to Disneyland, or actually it's Disney World because I'm from the East Coast, or Busch Gardens or Six Flags. So they were always going on these amazing trips. So I plotted in the 8th grade that I was going to mandate going on all of these fabulous trips by joining the band. So what I did is I literally took a dictionary, popped that thing open, and I looked in the A section and I was like, oh, I don't want to play the accordion. I didn't know what was in a band. I knew that I just needed some sort of vessel so that I could escape math class and go on with all of my friends. So I remember seeing, now this is starting to throw a wrench in my age publicly, but like I used to have to watch the Lawrence Welk show with my parents. They were really into the Lawrence Welk show. And I just thought the accordion was kind of, that was just like not my scene. So I turned over to the B section of the dictionary and I saw a picture of a bassoon. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go with this guy right here. The next week I took my dictionary to the band director, a man by the name of David Webb, who showed absolute compassion and accepted me into the band program. In the 8th grade, and I said that I wanted to play the bassoon, and he kind of looked at me like this kid come from out of nowhere who wanted to play the bassoon. But it was really just a vessel so that I could go on trips. And so I joined the band, and the band did not go on any trips the next year.
Oh no! Oh my God! All your hopes and dreams ruined.
And here I am all these years later, still waiting to go on my trip to Disney World. So.
Oh my God. Wow. So, okay, so then I assume that even though you didn't end up going on any trips, you found out that you really liked playing music.
I really did. I maybe even more so than the music making at first, because I was horrible. I mean, my first year, I was just terrible. But I think what I really enjoyed about being in the band program at that point was getting to make music communally, and I'm an only child, so I always kind of wanted brothers and sisters, but all of a sudden I had like 60 brothers and sisters. And band, especially in the South, where I'm from, band is really quite a community. It's kind of like having this very large family very suddenly. And then of course when I got to high school, we had a pretty large band program at my high school, and it's like its own community. So I really enjoyed the community aspect of band. And then of course, as I became a slightly more adept musician, the music making itself became a lot more rewarding.
So now we've figured out how you started the bassoon thanks to a dictionary and band trips that you never got to go on. Tell us, how did you get into being a conductor?
Even before I was involved in orchestra, I remember one of the things that we used to do at the house is we would watch John Williams. I didn't know who John Williams was at the time, but we would always watch the Boston Pops on the holidays because there was always like a big like PBS broadcast. And I was always curious as to I was like, okay, well, look at all these people playing their instruments, but what's that man doing right there? Like and I remember I would ask my mom, it looks like nobody's actually watching him. So I was always sort of fascinated with this person whose back was turned to me, but was, waving his arms at this massive sea of people in a curious way. So I always had a curiosity about that. So by the time I actually joined, a music ensemble, I got to see that this person had all of these very interesting responsibilities. And in high school, when you join marching band, which I doubt that's something you had to do coming up, but in marching band, you get the opportunity to audition to be the drum major or the conductor of the marching band. Well, I have to say that I auditioned in the 10th grade, the 11th grade, the 12th grade. I even auditioned for drum major in college, never got it.
Oh my God.
Maybe I'm overcompensating now by being a professional conductor. But while I never did get the opportunity to conduct at that time, I just was really fascinated by how these gestures might influence a room of people.
And can you talk to us about how your gestures influence a room of people? Because I think many people who aren't necessarily musicians don't quite understand what the role of a conductor is.
At its very core, I think a conductor's job is to enable musicians to play at their utmost and to not get in the way. When I recall upon the most organic and the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had as an orchestral music, it's been with a conductor who's been able to strike, I think, three critical balances. One that pays special attention and respect to the musicians that they're working with. I think one that also has a great relationship with the audience, but of course also with the composer that they are that they are performing. Sometimes I don't like to use the word interpret because I really try to do my best to not necessarily interpret, because I can interpret Mary Had a Little Lamb into a horror story with the right inflection. I feel like a good conductor is going to do their best to realize the composer's intent as best as possible.
Tell us what some of your favorite pieces are to conduct.
That has changed over the years. I think nowadays, the music that continues to be the most rewarding every single time I come back to it is Beethoven. I would say Beethoven is at the top of the list, and then there are some other close seconds.
Why Beethoven? Is it the way his music makes you feel, or do you have like specific memories that you associated or experiences in your life that somehow connect to certain pieces or parts of pieces that Beethoven wrote?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things. For me, music is emotional first. Everything else is secondary, because before I had any intellectual understanding about forms or harmony or melody or any of these very specific things that have to do with the theory or the facts, quite frankly, of music, it was about how the combinations of these sounds made me feel. How does it make me feel? And I think that's Beethoven's music has an immediate visceral reaction out of me every single time. And so I tend to be drawn to composers that I think are overtly expressive. And I find a lot of Beethoven's output to be certainly overtly expressive.
Oh, he definitely doesn't hide anything. I'm so glad that you touched on that, though, because I have often felt throughout my life and career that as a classical musician, we'll get really excited about different pieces of music that we love, and we'll talk about it amongst ourselves. But to the outside world, it's almost like there's this invisible barrier, and if you're not in the club, then you don't get to partake in such discussions, and you're only allowed to hear, the concert lectures that give you history lessons, or, you have to go to school and then study music theory and ear training and, how to play in tune, which are all important things if you're going to become a professional musician. But I also think that it's so important to talk about how music makes us feel, because that's basically what it's about. I mean, in other genres of music, you hear people talking about like how a certain song is like all of their feelings. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's the same thing when I listen to Mozart. So I just love that you brought that up. And I'm seeing here that you have some clips from a performance you did of Mahler. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Mahler?
I don't even know where to begin. Mahler, first of all, is surprisingly not terribly well known. I mean, the general public knows about Bach, Mozart, Beethoven pretty well, Tchaikovsky around Christmas time and things along those lines. However, Mahler is not a household name outside of the musician community. I mean, I think it is in Los Angeles because this is one of those towns where Mahler's played constantly, which I think is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But, the thing that Mahler did is that he was a maximalist. He doubled and sometimes tripled the size of the orchestra. And he maximized on so many things that other composers had tried to do, whether we're talking about emotional expression, ideas about religion, sensuality, length of piece. I mean, his third symphony takes like a week to perform. The volume of the orchestra, the textures that an orchestra could produce, but probably more importantly than anything, Mahler really expanded on philosophical depth. I mean, because up until that time, a lot of composers have written about music that either worship God or celebrated nature or expressed joy and frustration. But Mahler took all of that even further by trying to describe the human condition with an orchestra. So my introduction to Mahler was his Second Symphony, and it's the first piece of music that made me cry. The first movement of Mahler's Second Symphony concerns itself with internment or a funeral. Mahler is kind of searching for some answers, like what now? Do we exist after death? Is life a cruel joke? Two major questions arise from this first movement. The first being, what happens after death? And the The second question that Mahler asks and wrestles with throughout the entirety of this work is, what is the meaning of life? In this particular movement, a man is sort of at the edge of a cliff, so to speak, and really wrestling with all those questions that we were talking about. And all of a sudden, we hear an angelic voice in the distance that says to this man that you are from God. Return to God. The loving God will light your way to eternal life. I think the fourth movement of Mahler's Second Symphony is one of the most beautiful and touching works that has ever been written. And I had the great privilege of working with this mezzo-soprano local to Los Angeles named Maria Dominique Lopez, who I just think did a stunning job. After this utterance, we hear this beautiful phrase in the oboe played by our principal oboist, Marissa Honda. And the challenge with that phrase is that it's a long phrase, but it must be done in one breath. And you basically have to kill yourself to achieve that. It's absolutely breathtaking.
I would imagine that the oboist having to do the whole thing under one breath also contributes to how the music would then make us feel, even if we don't know that the oboist has to use a single breath to play that. You know, everything in how we create sound contributes to the emotional impact then that the listener has, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without question. In the fifth movement of Mahler's Second Symphony, at this particular moment, we hear a terrifying depiction of the apocalypse. So here you hear the entire 110-piece orchestra sort of going at full steam. And it's a depiction of the dead having arisen. They're marching in this gigantic, ghastly procession. The rich are poor, kings are now beggars, and everyone, and I do mean everyone, is terrified of divine judgment. It's a whirlwind of sound and terror, basically, and Mahler really knows how to make an orchestra sound very scary.
I was totally getting that scary part in the beginning, and I was imagining, you know, a lot of people who aren't used to going to classical music concerts or have a stereotypical image of it, which is in part true, of, you know, going into a concert hall and sitting down with a bunch of other people and then remaining quiet for X amount of time. You don't really feel enticed to think about what kind of journey you're going to be on, because it's just hard to imagine being on a journey when you're sitting in one place. But hearing an opening like that is just, I mean, the sound of the brass and having all of that sound of the orchestra wash over you simply when you're sitting in a seat can shock you.
Yeah, I think classical music, more than many other genres, can depict terror in a way that I think is pretty hard to beat.
I would agree. I think sometimes because our ears have developed over the past couple hundred years, we're used to hearing certain tonalities, so maybe they don't quite impress us as much at the beginning, but if you're really listening, certain pieces, they can actually be quite terrifying, if you really get into that mindset and listen.
The finale is one of the most glorious moments in all of Western music, I think. Gustav Mahler calls on the chorus to join in with this large orchestra. And he uses the chorus in such a way as to depict this heavenly chorus that calls on the dead to rise again. This is the resurrection. And the chorus is proclaiming basically that we have not lived in vain. So it's answering some of those questions that we were wrestling with in the first movement. There's a profound line that basically translates to, I die so that I might live. The whole reason that I performed Mahler's Second Symphony is because I was trying to find music that could quantify and express the life of Martin Luther King Jr. as closely as possible, making the parallels between what Mahler was wrestling with and what we've wrestled with as a nation, and reflecting upon the legacy of this civil rights icon. So we're wrestling with his death in the first movement, and then we're wrestling with the legacy of Martin Luther King's life, and then what's to happen afterwards. But in Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speech, his Sermon on the Mount, he predicted his own assassination. He basically alluded to the fact that he wasn't sure if he would be with us at the end. And I think that directly correlates to I die so that I might live. And he did die the next day, April the 4th, as we all remember. And his legacy lives on, even though somebody successfully did take his life away. I think there's 250 people on stage, and it's been one of the most incredible experiences of my life to have the opportunity to conduct this particular work.
Well, I'm tearing up just hearing you talk about this and the piece, and how something that Mahler wrote, how his music can support ideas and passions and issues that are really important to us as human beings. We can use music in so many different ways to celebrate humanity and to fight racism. It's just so powerful.
Absolutely. I feel that a lot of the composers and artists that I am personally drawn to are the ones who have suffered the most. So music that often deals with heavy subject matter is stuff that I tend to be drawn to. The lightweight material is cute, but and wonderful as well. But this material that really deals with the human condition is the music that I really am drawn to.
I agree, and I think one of the most beautiful things about classical music as a whole is that it has the capacity to express the most depressing things about the human condition, and also on the total flip side, express the silliest things and really bring us up when we're feeling down, while reminding us how it feels to be down, so that we don't have to go through that again, or so that we feel comforted when we do go through it. It's just the spectrum is so wide.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Well, I really, really appreciate, Anthony, that you decided to join me today and talk about classical music and share with us these bits of your performances. It's just amazing to be able to see.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor and privilege to get to spend some time with you. And usually I'm behind you in an orchestra.
Well, I don't know, sometimes off to the side.
Yeah, absolutely. But great to see you. Hopefully we can all see each other in the real world at some point.
I hope so too.
I'm going to do a concerto together at some point.
Yeah, I would love that. That would be amazing.
So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you, Anthony. Stay well.
Take care.
Isn't it wonderful that we not only got to hear this incredibly dramatic music, but also see Anthony in performance? If you want to hear more, you can go to his website, www.anthonyparnther.com, or find him under the featured channels of my YouTube page. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to Classical Conscience. Come back next time to meet Jean-Sun Lee, a scientific computing analyst working at a biotech company with a fascinating life in music. See you then. Bye.